Thank you for listening to this PodcastOne production. Now available on Apple Podcasts, PodcastOne, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
PodcastOne presents the Steve Austin Show Classics.
I'm fixing to continue my conversation with the one and only Jim Cornette. You can follow Jim Cornette on Twitter at @TheJimCornette. And you can check out his website, JimCornette.com. You can check out his podcast, The Jim Cornette Experience, on YouTube. Or what's it called? What it was, I can't even remember the goddamn thing it was. Fuck it, don't worry about it. I'm going to be on his show, and when I am on his show, I'll give you the 411 then. Jim's going to drop that information in the interview. It's part 2 of the interview. Let's kick back and visit with one of my favorite managers of all time, Jim Cornette. I'm talking to Jim Cornette here on the Steve Austin Show. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Let's talk about Big Boss Man for a second. Big Bubba Rogers.
Yes.
When he made his debut on TV, what was that, NWA or WCW?
Well, NWA in those days. It was the WCW program, but it was still Crockett Promotion.
Yeah, but anyways, I mean, good. That was the good shit, man. That was my favorite program of pro wrestling. And boy, all of a sudden, this big sumbitch comes out, and he had those glasses on, the suit, and didn't say a whole lot. He's like, man, this is a big motherfucker. Who got him into business?
Well, it depends. Big Bubba Rogers was entered into the business by Dusty Rhodes, but Ray Traylor was broken into the business by Ted Allen. One of the Nightmares, and the guy who, Ted Allen was a Georgia native. He just passed away a few years ago, but he trained some guys up in Rome, Georgia, Marty Lundy, Arn Anderson's hometown. But basically, Ted would bring job guys to the Atlanta TV tapings on occasion, and one day he brought this big kid, Ray Traylor, who was 6'6" and 360 pounds, and had no tan, and didn't really have a great physique to him. And everybody's looking like, Jesus Christ, this guy is going to be a job guy. He's a giant. And I don't know whether it was Dusty's perverse sense of humor or whether they just drew straws and Dusty hadn't seen what the guy looked like, but he put Ray in a match with Tully Blanchard. And Tully, on a good day, 5'10" and 205 pounds, right? Yeah. Tully's finish was the slingshot suplex.
Yeah.
And so, Ray told him, I'll take it. And Tully kind of looked sideways, but okay, well, let's go for it. What the fuck? Ray Traylor at 6'6" and 360 pounds took the slingshot suplex from Tully Blanchard at 5'10" and 205. And Dusty saw that and said, I'm going to do something with that boy. And took him off TV. And the next, he didn't have him on TV for 6 or 8 weeks. And he told me, he said, I'm getting you a bodyguard. And at the time, to be quite honest, I needed a bodyguard because we were having a lot of fan incidents and most of them were getting the better of me. And, when I was on the floor, the boys are in the ring. So I'm like, I'm happy. I'm like, I don't care who it is. Give me a bodyguard. I'm happy. And then he showed me this big son of a bitch. And talking to Ray just instantly, and it's funny to call him Ray because I've called him Bubba even after he was boss man. Yeah. Every time I saw him, I called him Bubba. But he was a nice guy. He was fun to be around. He had a great sense of humor. He was into the business without being markish. But basically, he had like 12, 13 matches. That's it. And Dusty said, we're going to call him Big Bubba Rogers. He's going to be your bodyguard from Louisville, Kentucky, that your mama has sent down because all these bad wrestlers is trying to get a hold of you, right? And so, dressed him up in a suit and the sunglasses and the hat. And I came up with the Peter Gunn music. I said, this is great. Well, let's play it. Doon, 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 doon. And we could do that then because it was the Wild West. It was commercial music. What the fuck? And Dusty had him, the idea was that Bubba would sell nothing. He was impervious to pain. He was unstoppable, and he was building up himself a main event opponent while getting heat on me in the midnight at the same time because having this huge giant bodyguard with us. So it ended up Bubba, he basically put him on television. He had him sell nothing. Then there's the infamous time that Dusty hit him over the head. Remember when me and Baby Doll were going to clash at the Great American Bash, and Baby Doll was doing a workout to show what Magnum TA and Dusty Rhodes had taught her. And no, actually, I was doing the workout, and Baby Doll came in and belly to bellied my opponent, Randy Mulkey. And then Bubba's going to menace her, and Dusty comes in with a wooden folding chair, and point being, He hits Bubba over the head with the wooden folding chair. Now, he had told Klondike Bill beforehand, gimmick the chair so the chair will break, right? Okay. So when Dusty comes in, he hits Bubba over the head with this folding chair. The chair exploded. It horse-collared around Bubba's neck. Didn't even knock his hat or glasses off. And Dusty backs up for the first time ever. Dusty Rhodes, the American Dream, is backing up from somebody. Yeah. And Bubba just calmly took the chair off from over his head, took his hat off, took his glasses off, starts taking his jacket off. Here comes Magnum with a baseball bat. And the two of them together, I'm dragging Bubba out. He don't want to go, right? And what an impact that made. And we get back, and I told Klondike Bill, I said, Bill, what a job you did with that fucking chair. He said, oh, shit, I forgot. He didn't gimmick the chair. Dusty hit him so hard it just broke. And another time, Bubba took this so seriously. He was never to smile. He was never to speak. I used to try to crack him up on interviews, and he'd be biting his fucking lip, right? Blood would come down. But we go to the Omni in Atlanta in a fucking cab. And because that, the big stars, I mean, there's 400, 500 fans waiting out back of the Omni to see all these big wrestling stars come in. Here we come in a yellow cab, but they accepted it back then because, we were all paying our own road expenses.
Yeah.
And we get out of the cab, and while we're getting our bags, the cab driver, Bubba, leaned up against the cab to pick his bag up, and the cab driver slammed the door, and it latched on Bubba's fingers.
What happened?
And Bubba goes, hey, brother, the door, hey, brother, the door. And the guy said, oh, my God, and he grabs it, and he opens it, and Bubba pulls his hand out, sticks in his pocket, picks his bag up, starts walking back in the back door. And I'm behind him. I'm going, are you okay? And as soon as we got through the back door and the door closed, he fucking bent over, started screaming. He started crying, oh, motherfucker. Bubba had a high-pitched voice. Oh,
yeah.
And I'm like, are you all right? He said, yeah, I think I'm okay. I said, fuck, why didn't you sell that? He said, I couldn't sell. The fans were watching. That's the kind of dedication he had. And it just, finally, the reason why he left and went and got his break as Big Boss Man, but the reason why he gave his notice was Starrcade 87. It was the Midnight and Rock and Roll in a Scaffold match in Chicago, and they had Bubba go up there. They didn't have him take the bump off, but they had Bubba go up there and fucking do a little spot with Ricky Morton where Ricky ended up nut-shotting him and running away or whatever. And we all got our checks. We all got 10 grand apiece, and Bubba got 5. And Bubba said, you know what? I fucking climbed that fucking thing too, and I could have fallen off just like everybody else, and they shorted me. And right about that time, Hogan was looking for big monster opponents, and somebody had made the call, and he told me, he said, I got to go. I said, yeah, you got to go, because you're going to work with fucking Hulk Hogan in the WWF, so you got to go. You got to go now. And he gave his notice, and he went up there and became the Big Boss Man and made a ton of fucking money.
Man, that was a great gimmick, too. And I finally ended up getting to go to WWF. I turned into Stone Cold. And my 2 Ray Traylor stories were, one time, back in the day, we'd go to, we'd spend a week in England, and then we'd go right to Germany, or Germany first, and then right to England. And, the boys, we're back here, it's a tour bus. It's a bus for the heels, a bus for the baby faces. Of course, man, we're living it up in the back of the bus. Everything is going around. We're drinking like fish. We're having a good time. We're working our ass off every single night. We're sold out. And I got a couple of shots. I'm working with Ray. And, of course, just like you said, everybody loved Big Boss Man, Ray Traylor, whatever you want to call him. And we were out there, we were working some town, whether it was England or Germany, I can't remember. And, Ray had a quick left hand. And, man, he hit me about 6 or 7 times with that motherfucker. And I was always very patient about potatoes in the ring because I work snug myself. And after he hit me with that final one, because he was kind of haggard from all the party, and I was kind of haggard. And Earl Hebner, my buddy, was the referee of that match. And he kind of looks at me. He's got that little smirk on his face. He knows it's about time to send one back. And so, after about that last one, I looked up at Earl, he looked at me, and I looked over at Ray, and I grabbed him by his arm. I threw him in the ropes. I said, watch your clothesline. So here comes big old Ray. You're about 6'6", running vertical, because he knows I'm going to hit him right there, a little bit below his Adam's apple so he can take that bump for me. But I called an audible. I hit that motherfucker flush vertical in the forehead with my forearm as hard as I could. And Big Ray went down like a shot. He went down to his knees, and on his knees, he's almost as tall as I am. And he looked up at me, and it was just like the cartoon you were talking about a while ago. You can see the little stars going around his head, and he had that little smile on his face, and he goes, okay.
Point taken.
He knew, he finally got his receipt, and he didn't touch me for the rest of the tour. But I absolutely love that guy. And we were going to work an angle one time. We were working a pay-per-view. We're in St. Louis at the Kill Center, Kill Arena, whatever the fuck it's called. I can't remember who I was working with. But during the finish, Ray was supposed to run down and hit me in the head with a chair shot and cause me to lose the match. Well, we get to that point in the match. Ray Traylor don't show up. This is a pay-per-view. Ray Traylor don't show up to hit me with the chair. So they call an audible a gorilla. And that was back when Jerry Briscoe used to work back there in a gorilla. So they sent Jerry down to hit me with a chair shot to just so somebody could hit Stone Cold with a chair and end the fucking match. And so, of course, Briscoe, that's a badass wrestler. Everybody knows the Briscoes are bad, but they're not used to working with chairs. So he hits me with kind of a lame chair shot. And I go down for the count, 1, 2, 3, because that was, what was supposed to do. And so, man, I'm laying there in the goddamn, middle of the ring. It was a kind of shitty chair shot. And I absolutely love Jerry Briscoe. But the chair shot wasn't so great. I'm laying there, 1, 2, 3, blah, 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 big sell. The crowd's mad. I got fucked. So finally it's time for me to get up and make my way to the back of the arena and, go take a shower. And all of a sudden, there's Ray. He missed his fucking cue. He was in the dressing room talking to The Undertaker. Ray, just always talking, shooting the shit. And I love Ray Traylor to death, God rest his soul, but I cussed that motherfucker up and down and just lit into his ass. But he was a sweetheart of a guy, but was he for shoot a real prison guard back in the day?
Well, yeah, that's the thing. That's how they got the gimmick. They didn't have to, once again, all great gimmicks are an extension of the personality. Before he trained, and while he just had gotten in the business before he quit to be a full-time wrestler, he was a prison guard at Cobb County Correctional Institute. And that's how he, as a matter of fact, he used to, when he would stop the fans from getting to me, he would say, well, it's our prison guard training because we contain people so they're not a danger to themselves or others. And I said, well, you contain all these motherfuckers you want to and trying to kill me, and that's fine with me. But yeah, he worked. And as a matter of fact, when he worked for me in Smoky Mountain, he did a few shots as the boss man coming in to be a special, ringside enforcer referee. I actually went down to his house and we went over to Cobb County because he still had friends there and shot his promos in the prison. But he was completely legitimate. There wasn't any bullshit about that at all.
But he was just a big corn-fed, raw-boned son of a bitch. Did he have a sporting background? Because he was so quick and agile and strong.
I think he might have played a little high school football down there, but no outstanding sporting background to speak of. But he was light on his feet. He was just a natural.
He's one of those guys. When you get him next to him, that's a big human being.
The first angle he did with Dusty was at the 86 Bash in Charlotte. We were at Memorial Stadium, and it was the cage match. And after the cage match was over with, some way or another, Dusty was going to come through the door, but we were going to trap Magnum and Baby Doll inside the cage, and Bubba was going to get a hold of him. And Bubba had Dusty on his knees at ringside, and this was for TV. And if you can hear this is what it sounded like, because Bubba literally had only had 12, 13 matches at this point. Every time he punched Dusty on the head, it sounded like that. They looked like shit, and they hurt. And you could see a bump coming up, and Dusty would go, oh, 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 oh. And we almost felt sorry for him.
Yeah.
Well, there you go.
Hey, man, you brought up a name a while ago, a few minutes ago in a conversation, the Mulkey brothers. Tell me about the Mulkey brothers. Randy and, was it Bill?
And Randy and Bill Mulkey.
Randy and Bill Mulkey. Dude, give me some background on these guys.
Well, Atlanta TV was noted in those days in the early and mid 80s for having some of the worst job guys in the history of wrestling. Some of them that could work but looked like shit. Some of them that couldn't work and looked like shit. Mike Jackson would bring some guys over from Alabama, but Mike was a good worker, but most of the guys that he brought with him weren't. And there was some local guys from South Carolina and Georgia, and et cetera, but a few of them attained legendary status. And George South, who was an excellent worker from Charlotte and still works to this day and did not fit in the category of bad job guy. He was the guy that was so good. Flair always wanted to have a great match with him, and they'd get mad at Flair for doing so much with George South because he was only a job guy. But he was a great worker. But Randy and Bill Mulkey were from Anderson, South Carolina. And Randy, I believe, was the first one in the business, and he was the more physically impressive of the brothers at like 5'10" and 200 pounds maybe, and didn't have a muscle that showed. And his brother Bill was a couple inches taller and about 20 or 25 pounds lighter. And as I said about him one time on commentary, if he'd have got a sunburn, he'd look like a thermometer. They were fishy white pale. They had bleached blonde hair. They had no physique, but they took the god-awfulest bumps that anybody had ever seen. I mean, when you threw Randy Mulkey out of the ring, he didn't grab any ropes. He didn't touch anything. He just launched himself through the ropes and landed on the concrete. And it's so hard.
In a heap.
In a heap. You could feel it in your feet when he landed on the concrete floor. And Bill would take an ass whipping, and he'd look like, he went to give blood and forgot to say when. I mean, he was so emaciated. And these two unlikely looking fuckers, because of, as Dennis Condrey used to say, they took a classic ass whipping. They started to get a following among the people in the studio who started cheering for them. And so then, because they were great guys and they were willing to do anything, they'd take any move, they'd do anything for you. At the time, this was 1986. Hulkamania was big, right? So I went over one day as a joke, and on commentary I said, "Look at that!" As the Midnight Express beating him up, I said, "Mulkey Mania is running wild." The next week, it was sort of like, I remember something like this after somebody said Austin 316 says, "I just whooped your ass," and the next day on Raw, the arena was full of Austin 316 signs. Yeah. Organically, the next week on Atlanta TV, they brought signs that said Mulkey Mania. And they started chanting for him, and it started catching on. And so then Dusty put them in the Crockett Cup tournament that year, the tag team tournament. And they actually the worst thing that ever happened was they won a match. When they won a match on TV, it kind of hurt them because the people, they were at stores in Anderson. They were going around making their own T-shirts, Mulkey Mania, and putting them in stores and selling them. So the climactic point of this was like in early 1987. We were the U.S. Tag Team Champions, and they had me come out and they say, "We're not going to defend against the Rock and Roll because we've already beat them. We're not going to defend against somebody else. We've already beat this team and that team and the other team." And Jim Crockett comes out and says, "Well, I've got a team you haven't wrestled, and you're going to defend against them, the Mulkey brothers." Okay, and it's going to be in Anderson, South Carolina. No, their hometown. So Dusty, just as a rib, and just because it was fun, the Anderson Rec Center seated about fucking maybe, I don't know, 1,000 people, 1,200 people, whatever, in this old rec center building. But he had us promoting a U.S. tag title match against the Mulkey brothers in Anderson, South Carolina, at this little building when we're running the Baltimore Civic Center and the Philadelphia Civic Center and the Omni in Atlanta, all these big buildings. But we're talking about this thing on Atlanta TV for 6 weeks. We get to that building that night. I've never seen a building so full, and I know that wrestlers' exaggeration, right? It sold out. We always had a riot, et cetera, et cetera. But literally everybody in Anderson that could get there, and 3/4 of them were related to the Mulkeys. They did a $17,000 house when tickets were, like $8 and $10 at that point in time. And it was jam-packed, and they say, "Okay, fuck them. Fuck them!" What, they're the whole goddamn family, the whole town. They'll kill us. They'll lynch us. They'll drag us out in front of the building and lynch us. So we had a 20-minute match with them and put them over as much as possible, and then got the heat on Bill Mulkey, and the boys kept calling, "Come back, come back." And he was so blowed up, the first 3 rows of ringside were passing out of oxygen deprivation. Because Bill Mulkey was sucking so much air. They'd never had a match this long, right? Yeah. And finally, the simplest fuck we could think of was, I think it was Bill shot Bobby Eaton in the corner, and Stan Lane, he was Bobby's partner at the time, hooked his tights. So when Bill tried for the monkey flip, he fell backwards on his head, and Bobby scooped his legs and pinned him 1, 2, 3. As soon as the 1, 2, 3 happened, we had put our bags at the back door, which we did often in those days, just for such an occasion.
Yep.
And immediately the boys rolled out, and we ran back before anybody knew the match was over. We ran back, grabbed our bags, and jumped to the car. And as we're peeling around the front of the building, we see the fans coming out. It looked like the villagers in Bavaria after the Frankenstein monster. They were carrying pitchforks and torches. We were already gone. We wouldn't have lived if we'd have stayed in that building.
So they got mad.
Oh my God. The hometown had been maligned there. So that was one of the most dangerous situations we were ever in, was against the Mulkey brothers in Anderson, South Carolina.
That's back in the good old days when you could get some real heat. Right now, Jim, I'm looking at the Midnight Express and Jim Cornette, the 25th anniversary scrapbook by yourself with Tim Ash that you sent my way. I'm on page 121 of this illustrious piece of history. And there's a picture of you abusing Earl Hebner. When did you first meet Earl Hebner? He's one of my favorite referees to work with. How'd you get along with him?
Oh, tremendously. Earl and his brother Dave, both from Richmond.
Yep.
And so when we went to work for Crockett, Tommy Young was the senior referee at the time.
Love Tommy Young.
Tommy Young was the greatest referee of all time.
Yep.
And that's not to downplay Earl or anybody else, but
Yep.
he just, he had it. But Dave had just at that time, I believe, or was right about that time, had done the twin referee thing, had left and gone to work for Vince to do the twin referee thing. No, and I'm sorry, Dave was still refereeing at the time, but Earl was refereeing more. But then that's when Earl left to go to, because Dave had already gone up there, and then Earl left to work. But anyway, I digress. I'm blathering. Earl was great. Earl, refereed a lot of especially the northern towns, Philly and Baltimore and Richmond and et cetera. And he was great, and he was a salty fucker too. If somebody hit the ring, they didn't have to worry about the wrestlers. They had to worry about Earl Hebner getting a hold of him.
Really?
I've seen him many times. He'd take a guy down and immobilize him. One time in Richmond, a fan jumped in the ring on the Horseman and JJ as they were beating on Dusty, and I remember Earl's the one that got to the guy and stretched him the worst out of the bunch of them. Arn tried to kick the guy in the face, but he ended up breaking JJ's fingers because JJ was trying to get his fingers in the guy's eyes to stop him. But yeah, Earl and Dave Hebner both, to this day, I think they're some of the funniest guys in the wrestling business.
You're listening to another classic episode of The Steve Austin Show, only on PodcastOne.
Hey, man, do you own or rent your home? Sure you do, and I bet it can be hard work. You know what's easy? Bundling policies with Geico. Geico makes it easy to bundle your homeowners or renters insurance along with your auto policy. It's a good thing, too, because you already have so much to do around your home. Go to geico.com, get a quote, and see how much you could save. It's Geico easy. Visit geico.com today. That's geico.com.
Steve Austin Unleashed.
Hey, man, last week we talked about some of the colossal fuck-ups you've seen in your time in wrestling. You traveling around with the Midnight Express and working so much with the rock and roll, the Fantastics, all those guys, and just being back there in that day, you had to see a shit pile of good ribs. You got any good rib stories for me and my listeners?
Oh, my God. It was a big deal in the Carolinas, and I won't mention the guy's name because he's still happily married, but Ric Flair was behind it. But it was a big deal in the Carolinas in the old days because the same cops worked all the matches, right? And so you got to know the cops, and they were legitimate city police officers. Well, it was a big deal back in those days for them to come in and arrest a guy in the locker room for statutory rape or some horrible offense and take him out and put him in a cop car. And it got to be going, I didn't know that they were 17 and blah, blah, blah. One time they did it to me because I was wrestling with, I was managing the Midnight. They were wrestling Dusty and Magnum in Charlotte. And I poked Dusty with the tennis racket. And here came this fan that we didn't even see. And I had two cops sitting behind me, squatted down, sitting on the railing behind me. But this guy ran from such a distance that he basically hurdled the rail and the two cops and just drilled me right in the back of the head with a straight right shot. And it would have knocked me out if I'd have saw it coming.
Yeah.
But it just, oh, and then he grabs me in a headlock and he's trying to get to me and the cops are trying to pull him off. And I can't get separated from him enough to get a swing with a racket or a fist or anything because he's got a hold of me and it's a big clusterfuck. And here comes Dusty. Dusty's going to save the day. Dusty comes through the ropes and cross bodies all of us. Me, the Mark, and like 6 or 8 cops, and we all go down. And when we get up, I see I'm going to get one shot at this motherfucker, right? He got one on me. I'm going to get one on him. And I haul off and try to football kick him in the ribs in the pile of all this shit. And I ended up kicking one of the cops in the leg. I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. Well, about a week or two later, they come into Spartanburg at the Memorial Auditorium in the locker room. And they've got a warrant for my arrest for assault on a police officer. And I'm shitting. I'm like, but no, you understand. Doug Dillinger, you were there. He's a cop. You were there. You understand. I didn't mean. I'm sorry. And the guys are turning away from me, and I'm like calling for anybody named Crockett and Baby Doll. And I feel bad about this day. Baby Doll is sitting there in the middle of the locker rooms. She had a little room, one side was heel, one side was babyface. She's the only girl, so she sits in the middle where she can, dress and not be in the room with the guys. She's laughing, trying to cover up. She's laughing because she was in on it. But I didn't know what the fuck. And I turned to her. I'm like, what are you laughing at, you fat fucking hog?
Oh, no.
I was real stiff with her. She got mad at me. But, I'm being arrested, right? And I'm being hauled out in handcuffs. And then they said, before we put you in the car, read the arrest warrant. And I read the warrant. It was signed by Big Daddy Jimmy Crockett. And then they started laughing. I'm like, oh, okay. Bobby Eaton was the simple ribber. He was the guy that when you'd get out of the car to take a piss at a gas station bathroom, he'd take your full soft drink cup with the straw in it, and he'd tie a knot in the bottom of the straw and stick it back through so when you tried to take a drink, your head would cave in. And he had the fake dog turd, add milk or, whatever. He did the simple stuff like that. Stan was the production number ribber. Right? He was the guy one night in Memphis, Killer Carl Krupp had come back into territory. And this was a variation on the old classic wrestling Mabel rib, the Mabel rib. This has been done in every territory.
What's the Mabel rib?
Well, it's basically the gist of it is this. Krupp had come back in the territory, that ugly, bald-headed German, and he asking around if the girl that he used to see was still around the matches. Well, the girl was still around the matches because she was still around Stan right at the time. But they said, no, we haven't seen her. We don't know where she's at. Well, later on that night at the hotel, she's in Stan's room, and she calls Killer Carl Krupp's room, and he answers the phone, and let's say her name was Mabel because that's where it comes from. Oh, Mabel. It's so good to hear from you again, sweetie. I've missed you so much since I've been gone. Well, Carl, I can't come to the matches anymore because, my husband, he got out of prison. And he's back now, and he's very jealous. And, oh, my God, if he knew what had gone on between us, I don't know what he'd do. That's why I don't want to cause any trouble. That's why I haven't been – oh, as a matter of fact, hold on. I think he might be coming home now. I'll call you back. Click. So then about 15 or 20 minutes later – she calls back. Oh, I thought it was him, but it wasn't. But like I said, he's very jealous. And since he's been out of prison, he just doesn't let me go anywhere. So I don't want to cause any trouble. But I'd love to see you again, Carl. Oh, can't you come down? Well, no, I just don't feel. Oh, shit. He really is coming this time. Hold on. I'll call you back later. Right. 15 minutes later, he calls back. She calls back again. He answers the phone. Hello, Carl. Now she's crying. Carl, I don't know how to tell you this. What, Mabel? What's wrong? Oh, Carl, he caught me on the phone. He's so jealous. He knew I was talking to somebody, and he made me tell him who I was talking to. And you did? And he made me tell him what we've done. You did? And he made me tell him where you are. You did. And Carl, he's got a gun. This time, Carl's the one that hangs up the phone. Stan and Mabel run to the fucking curtains because they can see across the breezeway where Krupp's room is, right? Here he comes out of the door carrying his bag with a pair of shorts and flip-flops and his shirt over his shoulder, running to his car, gets in the car and drives off and never comes back to that hotel room. They see him the next day. Stan sees him the next day in the locker room and is like, Carl, hey, did you have a good night? How did you sleep? Oh, yeah, I was fine. I just decided to come over here, get the trip out of the way. That's the Mabel rib. But I mean, there were endless. There were so many. Mr. Fuji, he actually, in the Knoxville territory, he went so far as to spend like $1,000 one time to rib this guy. The guy came out of his apartment, got in his car, stuck his key in, and turned it, and the engine didn't turn over. And when he got out to look under the hood, it was because there was no engine. Fuji had a guy come and take the guy's engine out, and then later on paid to have it put back in, but just to see the guy's face when he opened his hood and all he saw was parking lot.
Hey, what was the deal with Bobby Eaton back when we were in WCW? Me and Bobby Eaton and Dustin Rhodes, center stage. There's one of those hallways back there. We always used to dress back there. And, Bobby Eaton always used to travel with that duffel bag.
Yeah.
And it was like a convenience store. And Bobby, it gets like, God damn it, boy, what you need? Toothbrush? Oh, I got a toothbrush. Toothpaste, bubble gum, a sewing kit, whatever you needed, Bobby had. He was one of the nicest guys in the history of the business. I don't know anybody that has anything bad to say about Bobby Eaton. He's one of the greatest workers of all time. But what was the deal with his bag? He had one of everything.
Bobby liked to be prepared. And he would carry these bags that looked like body bags. There were the hugest bags. And especially when we were driving, but even flying, he would carry everything. He'd have 5 or 6 towels. Used to be
always
a game.
Carried extra towels.
It used to be a game. Sometimes, like the Steiners would go up and ask for off-brand shit like, hey, Bobby, you got any silverware? And he'd come out with silverware. He always had everything. He was prepared for every eventuality, but at the same time, he would give it all away. One time we worked Reunion Arena in Dallas when we were working for the Von Erichs, and we go to, you remember at the time, even back in the 80s, that it was not the greatest neighborhood in some areas around Reunion Arena, that we found a beer store, a little convenience store. And, Bobby's going to go in and get his usual thing was Miller. Dennis might get some beer, might get some meat sticks. I'd get, my daggum, gas station sandwich and a Pepsi or whatever at that point. And so we get back in the car and there's all these bums hanging around. And Bobby is in there forever. And we're like, what the fuck? What the fuck? And finally he comes out. Some guys hit him with a hard luck story. He comes out with his arm around the guy. The guy he had a brand new cigar in his mouth. He was carrying a bottle of whiskey and another bag of groceries. And Bobby was patting him on the back saying, good luck, brother. Good luck, fella. And of course, then Bobby gets in the car and the bum turned and started walking down the side of the convenience store, and he was instantly mugged, 15 feet away by all these other bums around to get all his shit. But Bobby could not buy somebody something or give somebody something or just, help somebody out.
Hey, man, you manage, singles wrestlers, tag teams. To me, you and the Midnight Express, that's just the first thing that comes to my mind when I think of Midnight or you. But speaking about tag teams, as you've been around so many of them, taking Midnight Express out of the equation, who are some of your favorite tag teams that you either enjoyed working with or just watching as a pure fan?
Oh, God, well, working with, obviously, the Rock and Roll, obviously
I
the
love
Fantastics.
the Rock and Roll Express. I love the Fantastics, too.
The Rock and Roll, you could start a riot because Ricky Morton could sell to the point where, and also when he would sweat and the sweat would be running down his face and he got that pained look on his face, it looked like he was crying.
Yeah.
And he would reach out to the people in the front row and with his hand and he would mouth the words, help me. And they would.
And he was a good looking, he was a good looking guy. And he was just, he could really place himself he could be very vulnerable. As fiery as he was, because they both had great fire, but Ricky could sell his ass off.
Yes, and that's become a phrase, selling like Ricky Morton.
Yep.
And so the Rock and Roll and the Fantastics and the Road Warriors and Tully and Arn, and those guys were great to work with. As far as who I liked watching, I didn't get a chance to see him live in person, but I've seen films. Stevens and Bockwinkel to me were fantastic. Ray Stevens and Nick Bockwinkel in the AWA. I always enjoyed one of my favorite tag teams, and actually a team that nobody really remembers because they were always on top in main events in Tennessee. Back in the 70s, Tennessee was 3 different territories. It was the Memphis End for Jerry Jarrett. It was the Middle Tennessee territory for Nick Goulas, and it was the East Tennessee territory for the Fullers Southeastern Wrestling. And Phil Hickerson and Dennis Condrey were my favorite heel tag team to watch. Phil was an old redneck, pot-bellied fucking guy that could cut a heck of a promo and threw a mean fist, but he could move. And Dennis was his younger and smaller partner, but they meshed perfectly. And they spent about 5 years rotating between those 3 Tennessee territories, always main eventing, but they had great matches with everybody. Loved watching them. I was always big on the heel teams when I was a kid, anywhere from Kurt and Carl von Bronner to the interns with Ken Ramey to, Don and Al Green, the original Heavenly Bodies. Tennessee was a tag team territory, so there were just, oodles of tag teams. The Valiant Brothers, I was always a mark for because, the bleach blonde, woo, Missy, and they worked for Bruiser, and I got a chance to see them. But just, any great tag team that traveled together with each other and went from territory to territory and really had experience, I enjoyed tag team wrestling. And you talk, I guess, I hope Phil Hickerson doesn't listen to this. If this is really Stone Cold Steve Austin Show Unleashed, I'll tell you another rib that involves, because I was going to save this for my tour of the United Kingdom, because I figure if I left the United States and actually told it over there that Hickerson wouldn't find me and kill me. But I told Dennis Condrey I was telling this story places, so he let me. One of the great ribs that Dennis actually ever pulled was with his partner Phil Hickerson, and we can tell it because this is the Unleashed program and we can say these things. They were working Tennessee, and this was back in the late 70s, and you remember Tojo Yamamoto.
Oh, yeah.
The most unlikely main event babyface in the history of wrestling. He was like 5'2" and shaped and looked like Buddha, but he had been a heel in Tennessee for years and got so over that he became a babyface and was one of the biggest box office attractions and trained guys like Bobby Eaton and Jerry Jarrett. After they got in the business, he was the guy that polished them. Well, Tojo was a great man and a wonderful human being, but as many people were back in those days, he was a little homophobic. And he always used to look at Phil Hickerson and Dennis Condrey sideways because Dennis had the bleach blonde long hair and Dennis had a big set of lips on the ass of his tights. They just did everything to get heat, right?
Yeah.
They could. And they would do the old heel stuff where Dennis would run on his knees away from the baby face and hug Phil.
Yeah, yeah.
And Phil would look around, and that's where we got a lot of that Midnight Express stuff. Where,
we did it ourselves.
Yeah, Dennis would hug Bobby. I'd hug Bobby. I'd kiss him on the cheek. Everything was all playing on people's, fucking various prejudices. Anyway, Dennis Condrey, unbelievably enough, because Phil trusted him, was able to convince Phil that it would be a wonderful rib, because Tojo was homophobic, if in Louisville, you remember when you came back to the locker room, you had to come downstairs, you had to turn right and go in one of those rooms. If when Tojo came back from the ring, that Phil would be down on his knees in front of Dennis, and Dennis would have his trunks down, and it would be just like that Tojo had caught Phil about to go down on Dennis Condrey, and he would validate all the things that he had thought about them because of their bleach blonde hair and the way they acted in the ring. Phil went along with this. So they've got somebody watching for when Tojo's coming. And they get the word, and Phil is down on his knees in front of Dennis, and Dennis even added to it right at the end. He said, have your mouth way open, right? You're just about to take it in. And Phil's like, okay. And so Phil's down on his knees with his mouth wide open. Dennis has his trunks down, standing in front of him. And, of course, Phil is looking to the side, right? Like so he can see Tojo's face when Tojo comes in and catches this alleged scene. And right as Tojo came around the corner, Dennis grabbed the back of Phil's head and shoved his dick all the way down his throat. And he said his tongue felt like sandpaper. And Phil came up off his knees and chased Dennis out the back of the Louisville Gardens, down the street, down Armour Place, turned right on 3rd Street, didn't speak to him for 3 or 4 days. And it remains one of the classic examples of the double reverse rib in history of wrestling, where the person that got ribbed was actually in on the rib to rib someone else until the rib turned. And of course, Tojo didn't know what to think. He didn't know what to think about the whole thing. But it was, that's the kind of.
That's one of the greatest stories I've ever heard in my life.
The thing is, you had to do that shit. You were on the road every day, all the time in those days.
Yeah, I know. It gets rough on the road and you get stressed out, but shoving your dick down another man's mouth as a rib goes, that's kind of pushing the limits.
We scared the shit out of Stan Lane one time. We were at Bobby.
What happened?
In the Dallas airport, found the glass brake hammer. And the glass brake, I still have it in my office to this day. It looked like a judge's gavel type of thing, but It took batteries. And if you tapped it, it had a speaker on the side and emitted the sound of glass breaking, right? So we got to be able to get some mileage out of this. So we'd flown into Dallas, and we got that, and we didn't tell Stan Lane about it. So we're riding back from the show that night, wherever it was outside of Dallas, going back to our hotel, and it's about 1 o'clock in the morning, and those old Texas roads, and we're going through, and all of a sudden we say, well, here, this town, Stan, when Dennis was part of the team before you joined us, why, we ran a spot show for the Von Erichs in this town and at the high school, and we were leaving, and son of a bitch, wouldn't you know, one of the fans was so mad he threw a brick right through Dennis Condry's windshield when we were leaving his town. And, well, wouldn't you know, there's the high school right there. And as Stan turns around, I've had this hammer for 140 miles, right, in the back seat. Bobby's driving for once. And as Stan turns to look at the high school, I hit that glass brake hammer on the fucking window right next to his head, and that glass breaking went off. He jumped backwards into Bobby's lap and broke into a kung fu stance, and I thought he was going to shit himself. We used to use props and shit like that. And it broke up the monotony. You had to do something, but it wasn't like bad ribs where we like destroyed people's property.
No,
like
that's
yeah,
that's the kind of. I never was big into the ribs. I certainly didn't like getting ribbed, and I didn't really rib anybody, but I certainly enjoyed watching ribs. But the guys that ribbed with malicious intent, that wasn't what it was about. It was about making the guys laugh and entertaining each other. I had a quick Tojo story. I just, I'd been in Dallas for like 2 months. They were beating the shit out of me on Friday nights and Saturday mornings in the Sportatorium. And then I was working full-time on the freight dock, and that's when I asked Jerry Jarrett, hey, when can I start working full-time? And he says, hell, Steve, I think you're ready now. I wasn't, but he said, I think you're ready now, so you're not going to argue with the promoter, right? So a couple weeks later, there I am driving to Mid-South Coliseum. And one of the guys, when I broke in, broke in as a babyface. And one of the guys that would come in from Tennessee, they would let all the heels get heat on me. Here I was, a young, good-looking cat with long blonde hair. One of the heels that used to kick the shit out of me on occasion was one P.Y. Chuhai, which is Phil Hickerson you spoke of in the rib. But going back to Tojo, I remember Tojo watched a few of my matches. And he goes, come here. And, like you said, Tojo, big as a minute. And he says... He goes, you need to learn how to sell. And, I'm the young guy, jacked up, 2 months in the business, don't know where to shit or wind my watch, still, trying to be a tough guy in the ring and not wanting to be vulnerable, the exact opposite of what you want to be as a baby face. So, Tojo said, grab my ear. And I said, what? He said, just grab my ear. And he showed me, grab my earlobe. So I reached out and I just barely grabbed Tojo's earlobe. And he just... put his hands up to his head, and he, made that face like I just almost killed him. That's how bad me touching his earlobe. And he goes, that's sell. And that's when a fucking light bulb went off in my head, and I was like, oh, I get it. You know what I'm saying? Tojo taught me, really how to sell by letting, me grab his earlobe and him showing me how painful it was. If the people in the goddamn crowd can't see that this stuff that is happening to you is hurting and affecting you, they don't give a flying fuck.
Well, exactly. And, that's why they always used to give the young kids to Tojo to season because, Bobby broke in just by, setting the ring up when he was 14 and practicing with a friend of his. They ended up teaching themselves. He was never formally trained, and he ended up starting to do jobs under a mask on TV when he was 15 years old, the Brown Bomber, and then, then he got a spot with Nick Goulas, but they would give Jerry Jarrett was trained by Tojo then, and Bob Eaton was trained by Tojo, and so many of the Tommy Rich, so many of the young guys with Jerry Jarrett. He would ride with Tojo, and Tojo would grab Jerry's ear and fucking crank down on the earlobe. And
Really?
Jerry would go, "Oh my God." And he would, "See your face? Look in the mirror. See your face? Now you make that face no pain, you sell." Right? That was, and he would break it down, like you said, to the simplest of terms. And Tojo could start a riot with a toothpick. He, especially in the old days of the small town shows, when he was a heel, he would have the baby face down and get a wrist lock on him, and he would take a toothpick out of his tights. And the referee, of course, couldn't see it because it was behind the, he was using his body to block it, right? Behind the referee's back. He would take the toothpick and he would be starting to dig under the babyface's fingernail, and the babyface would sell and scream, and then he'd put the toothpick back and he'd take it out again and he'd do it again. And after about a few minutes of this, people would be climbing over the rail to get this no good, evil Japanese son of a bitch to stop using this toothpick on the babyface's fingernails. And he was such a master of psychology. He looked like nothing you would imagine that a wrestler should look like, but he had so much heat from when he was a heel doing things like that when he switched babyface, people said, "Okay, now finally he's going to beat up the guys we don't like and do all these horrible things to them." And then he'd hit him with the heels with the wooden shoe, or he'd use a chop and they would fly. And he was an institution to this day. Once again, when you ask people in Memphis, name a professional wrestler, generally, it's Jerry Lawler, Sputnik Monroe, Tojo Yamamoto, Jackie Fargo.
Right.
That's who they name rather than Hulk Hogan or Ric Flair or whatever, because it was it was like El Santo in Mexico.
Yeah.
It wasn't just showbiz then. It was a cultural identity of that part of the country that those wrestlers were the big sports heroes.
Hey, one time quick Tojo story. One time we were wrestling Nashville at the fairgrounds Saturday night. And you remember Nashville, probably the chairs were the same when I was there, when you were there. There were those folding chairs, but they were those folding wooden chairs with the slats.
Yes. I guarantee you everything's the same in that building right now as it was 30 years ago.
You're listening to another classic episode of The Steve Austin Show, only on PodcastOne.
Hey, man, do you own or rent your home? Sure you do, and I bet it can be hard work. You know what's easy? Bundling policies with Geico. Geico makes it easy to bundle your homeowners or renters insurance along with your auto policy. It's a good thing, too, because you already have so much to do around your home. Go to geico.com, get a quote, and see how much you could save. It's Geico easy. Visit geico.com today. That's geico.com. We were working a goddamn tag match. I can't remember who all was in the match, but I just remember Tojo was ringside, and it was back when, he's 5'2", 5'3", whatever you said, 140 pounds at the most, and he carried that briefcase. And Tojo obviously was a veteran. He always, kept his head on a swivel, but this time he did not. And he had so much heat. There was this old lady, I guarantee you, Jim, she had to have been damn near 90 years old. And you know how those old people love their fucking wrestling. And This was back when wrestling was still real, quote unquote. You know what I'm saying? And Tojo wasn't watching what was going on. I was there on the ringside, and all of a sudden I look up. Next thing I know, that old lady had gotten up, picked up her chair, folded it, and hit Tojo just like you hit a nail with a hammer, just hit directly down on the top of his skull. And damn near knocked poor Tojo out. And you could see the goddamn stars kind of flying over his head. And, he maintained his composure. And the security guard, whatever it was, got the chair from the old lady. They basically just sat her down, didn't remove her because she was 90 years old. But that lady knocked the flying fuck out of Tojo. It was the damnedest thing I'd ever seen.
That's what I miss so much, I guess, about the business is people taking it seriously.
Well,
because the atmosphere was so different. But
the people within the promotion have to take the storyline seriously to begin with.
Yeah.
And that's where it starts. But yeah, man, I mean, god dang, when I watch something, I want to believe what I'm seeing, but what I'm being presented has to be, perceived as real or presented as real. You and I were talking the other day, yesterday. Goddamn, we fucked off 2 hours of because of my technology problems of a podcast, and we keep calling each other. And as soon as we start talking, we can't stop talking. But you and I were talking about UFC the other day because you left me a message that you were watching the pay-per-view. I was watching the same one too because I'm a big fan as well. And we were talking about UFC does a lot of things these days better than pro wrestling, when pro wrestling is basically what the UFC is doing now, but it was the fucking work.
Yeah. Right now, the most successful pro wrestling promotion in the world is the UFC because they hype the fights the same. The whole concept is basically, it's so simple. We're going to make you think that this guy that you're probably predisposed to dislike and this guy that you're hopefully predisposed to like are the two baddest motherfuckers in this weight classification or in this division on the planet. And we're going to put them in a trajectory to meet each other, and we're going to sell tickets to see the fight and what's going to happen. And then they trash talk each other. Not over the top, but enough to be believable. There's a grudge, there's an issue, they hype their fight, and they have their fight. And the fact that it happens to be real is the only difference between that and old-time pro wrestling. And, you saw it in the reactions of the crowds, in the arenas, you see it. That Mark Hunt and Bigfoot Silva fight was a double-juice Memphis main event brawl, and the people were throwing the babies in the air, just like it was Jerry Lawler and Terry Funk. And literally, I've seen insane things. In Louisville one night, literally a woman went into labor, and the EMTs had her on a stretcher, and she would not leave to go to the hospital until she found out who won the main event between Jerry Lawler and Bill Dundee. Christine Jarrett had to talk her into letting them take her to the hospital. And another time, a guy that had escaped from the city jail, actually went to the wrestling matches and got so wrapped up in what was going on that he hit the fucking ring, and they caught him. If you've escaped from jail, chances are you want to stay as far away from the cops as possible. Yeah. But in this case, he got so wrapped up on what was happening, he hit the ring to help the babyface out, and the cops grabbed him, took him back to jail.
You think the business will ever change? You think it's too far to the side that it is? And I'm not going to be derogatory because I'm still a part of the company. I still love wrestling, but okay, I'll speak. I think if you start taking yourself and your storyline seriously and weed out a little bit of the comedy, people will start taking the product seriously again.
I think that, as Dutch Mantell, who we've both learned a lot from,
yes,
has said, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube.
Right.
I don't think it's ever going to be what it once was in terms of the people taking it completely seriously. And some people, and I'm not going to go off on a Russo jag here, but Russo was just so gobsmacked to hear one time when we were talking in the car, when we first met each other, we actually did associate and ride together and speak to each other and everything. He couldn't believe, he looked at me like I had steaming turds hanging out of my mouth when I told him that people used to think wrestling was real. Because he grew up in New York and it's the center of the universe and everybody's the smartest people in the world there is what he thought. And that, oh no, I said, just because people in your backyard didn't take it seriously doesn't mean people anywhere else didn't take it seriously. But he couldn't look at it from that standpoint. He could never approach it from that philosophy. And so while, no, it's never going to draw 10,000 people a week, 52 weeks a year in the same town anymore, and nobody's ever going to take it as seriously as it once was, that doesn't mean you can't try. That doesn't mean that you still can't, because there was a time, and let's face it, when the internet came around, you and The Rock did what generated $50 million in one night in 2001 at WrestleMania 17. I was there. I saw it. I thought the fucking thing was great. And there was a Houston Astrodome full of people, watching it. And the internet had already come around and a lot of shit had already been exposed, but there wasn't any hokey hoo-ha in y'all's buildup.
Right.
So you can try and you can make the effort and you can... as we've talked about before, and it may have been on the Lost episode that, one of these days will be out there floating around in the ether that we did. But Terry Funk always said, And I brought this up to you on a phone call we had also, because you and Bret Hart at WrestleMania in Chicago in '97 reminded me of this. Terry Funk always said, I can't make them believe that wrestling is real, but I can make them believe I'm real.
Right.
People naturally want to, if they enjoy something, they want to believe in it. If they don't like something, they look for every reason they can to take the piss out of it.
Right.
But if they like something, they want to believe in it. And so even if they don't believe in wrestling, they can believe in personalities. And if anybody's given the opportunity to play it straight, if anybody's given the opportunity to present themselves as legitimate, and then if they have the talent to do so, yes, there'll always be drawing cards, but sometimes, unfortunately, it's this guy sells tickets in spite of his push rather than because of his push.
Right.
And that's a sad thing.
It is. It is. Again, going back to the Dutch Mantel thing, you can't put the toothpaste back in the toothpaste container, but you know, it is what it is. Man, I'm just a fan of serious wrestling. The product in the ring is about championship gold and real emotions and winning and losing and all the other horseshit stuff that you can throw in to make a great storyline. But hey, man, a while ago, before we wrap this up, you mentioned you were fixing to go on a trip to the UK.
I am, and everybody that knows me is gobsmacked over that, bumfuzzled even.
Let's talk about that. So what's going on? What's the tour? How long? Where will you be?
Well, you know, the reason I have never appeared in 30-something years in wrestling, I have never appeared outside the continental United States and Canada, because everybody knows that I shake like crazy when I'm on a plane. I'm claustrophobic. I'm a free perspirer. I'm a control freak. I'm afraid of heights. You know, the whole thing, being in a metal tube going 500 miles an hour, 5 miles over the ocean, you know, for hours at a time is not my idea of fun. But having said that, my wife loves England and has always wanted me to take her there. So that plays a part in it. But Alex Shane, who does Wrestle Talk TV, and a guy named James Dixon, who's written a number of books and wrestled over there, they contacted me over the summer and we started talking. And besides a generous financial offer, I got started thinking, you know, I haven't been on a plane in 10 years now. And how shitty must my luck be if I take 2 plane flights and something happens on one of them after I haven't been on a plane in 10 years? Maybe I deserve it. And so we put the tour together, and we're going to start off February 17th in Glasgow, Scotland. And we're going to do Manchester and Birmingham and London at the Leicester Square Theatre, and then up in Cardiff, Wales. It's going to be one-man shows, sort of like Mick Foley says. I don't want to call it stand-up. I don't know if it's Q&A. It's me doing what we do, what we're doing here.
Right.
Answering questions, talking to people, meet and greets. It's like it's going to be the Bruce Springsteen of Q&As, because I will not leave the stage until I'm covered with sweat and everybody's physically spent. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I'm also going to do a couple of VIP dinners and a couple of wrestling school seminars. I'm going to be over there for a couple of weeks. We're going to get some vacation in also, and I'm really looking forward to it. It's something I've never done. I want to visit some of these places. It's the Jim Cornette Experience Live, but we're calling it, for all you Sex Pistols fans out there, a corny in the UK. And you can go to jimcornettelive.co.uk for tickets and information, or if that's too much to remember, just go to jimcornette.com and click on events and appearances on the UK tour, and it'll take you right there where you can buy tickets for the meet and greets. We're going to have merchandise available. We're shooting these programs. We're actually even talking now about doing a documentary, because people think there's probably going to be some entertainment value out of me not only driving on the wrong side of the road, but also seeing some of these things for the first time ever at past 50 years of age. So that it's the end of the last 2 weeks of February. We're going to have a ball, and I encourage everybody, if you're in the sound of my voice over there in Scotland or the UK, to check it out and come see me. Come up and see me sometime. I promise you won't be disappointed. We're going to bullshit to the end of bullshit.
So how long can the shows last? You got to have kind of a set time to get in and out of the building.
We do. They're actually making me take an intermission because the buildings want to sell, concessions. I'm like, once I get cranked up, but we're going to take a break in between. But we're looking at 2 to 3 hour deals by the time, plus, meet and greet either before or afterwards by the time that everything gets started and gets finished. And it's I promise everybody they're going to get their money's worth, because it's not like that I've, been there often in the past, and it's not like I'm going to go on a regular basis in the future. So, and me, I'm there to do what I need to do until everybody's happy and smiling.
That's the only way to do it.
Especially if they're spending money, they need to get something out of it. And plus, think of all the pussy I'm going to get for taking my wife to England for Valentine's Day. Because, thing is, she'll cut you off in a heartbeat. I mean, I know a few guys she's cut out completely. So it's.
But
Thank you.
One and only Jim Cornette. Hey, right here in my hands. Let's keep doing a couple more plugs before we ride off into the sunset. You sent me 2 books. I've been looking through them. I'm looking through Rags, Papers, and Pens. It's the merchandising of Memphis Wrestling by Jim Cornette and Mark James. Also, the Midnight Express and Jim Cornette. It's the 25th anniversary scrapbook put together by yourself and Tim Ash. And, man, I'm not much of a reader because I'm a little bit ADD to your OCD, but I love looking through these old pictures. And so where can these fine human beings that roam our planet find this stuff, Jim?
You can go to jimcornette.com, and both those fine publications are available. Rags, Paper, and Pens is not only the history of the merchandising of Memphis wrestling and tells the firsthand story of how I got involved in professional wrestling as a photographer, but we reprinted programs and pictures back to the 50s all the way through the glory period of the 80s, and stuff that hadn't been seen in a long time, and how that the top wrestlers in the glory days of Memphis wrestling were making house buying money off those little $1 and $3 pictures that we sold at the merchandise table every week at the matches. And Rags, Paper, and Pens, the title comes from Sputnik Monroe, because he always used to say, there go the baby faces selling their rags, paper, and pens out there. And it stuck. And then the Midnight 25th Anniversary Scrapbook is basically a rock and roll tour book and a wrestling souvenir fan book with the date and the place and the result and the opponent and the gate and the notes on every match the Midnight Express and I had as a team for our 7-year period, plus a lot of color, paycheck stubs, memos, behind the scenes stuff that you didn't get a chance to see in those days. It's a unique look at a unique tag team, and I did it for our 25th anniversary. Actually, this year, we just passed our 30th anniversary. We had the first Midnight Express match in November of 1983. I still have a few left. They're going fast, but you can get them at jimcornette.com, and I appreciate the plug, Mr. Austin.
Well, you know what? We're just coming up shy of the 2-hour mark. It's time to ride off into the sunset. And, hey, the Jim Cornette Experience, your podcast. If you ever need an old wrestler with a bald head and a goatee, give me a yell. I'll come on your show sometime, plug some of my shit.
Well, funny enough, imagine that you mentioned that. I wasn't going to hit you with it out in public here while we had a good string
goddamn,
going.
I don't give a flying fuck. This is Unleashed, goddammit.
Well, in that case, if you're willing to do it, just folks, if you keep watching at the Jim Cornette on Twitter or jimcornette.com or MLW.com for MLW Radio, the Jim Cornette Experience, you will probably in the next few weeks be seeing that old broken down, bald-headed wrestler coming back out of the sunset and joining me on the Jim Cornette Experience, where I get to turn tables and ask you a bunch of shit.
Hey, that sounds great to me. And whenever you're ready, you just let me know, and we'll do it.
We're going to be booking it soon. Trust me.
All right, Jim, I appreciate you doing the show 2 weeks in a row. We got it all locked down. All your levels have been good. This is a successful endeavor. We're going to, we don't sell anything. We say, I got some T-shirts now coming down the road. This fucking podcast for free. This motherfucker's for the working man and the working woman, which you and I both are as well. You got to work for everything you get in life. Jim Cornette, it's been a pleasure talking to you. You're one of my favorite managers of all time. The Midnight Express is one of my favorite tag teams of all time. All the stuff with the rock and roll, the Fantastics, and the stuff that you were talking about, the stories. I enjoyed all of our conversations. I enjoyed the last podcast that will never air because it's only inside the conversation, but I think I enjoyed this one more. So I think, Austin Cornette 2 was a success. We'll do Austin Cornette 3 on your show.
Hey, we could go as long as Bobo Brazil and the Sheik. I think they hit 37 years. So the longest running program in wrestling. Thank you, Steve, very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us for another classic episode of The Steve Austin Show. Please leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts and tell your friends. For more Steve Austin Show, go to PodcastOne.com. That's PodcastOne.com.